So I'm Ezio Melotti. I'm the lead developer of SIMOC, and I'm also a core developer of the Python programming language. If any of you here is a developer, you probably know Python. And I've been working with Kai on this project for 3 years now. So what is SIMOC? SIMOC is a scalable interactive model of an off-world community. What does it mean? We want to simulate what happens in a closed off-world community so that all the agents and currency that we have inside can interact. We want to see how they interact and over a span of months, weeks, or longer. So we create this simulation to see how it works and simulate things like STEM or other like the based on Mars. A bit of history of this. So it was the initial concept was from Kai Stats, but did the talk just before mine, and it was the idea came out in 2014. After a few years, he managed to get some funding from the Arizona State University, and with a capstone team, he started working on SIMOC. So the first capstone team created the foundation of what SIMOC is today. In 2019, I joined the project, and it was like a bit of a bad moment because there was no funding that year. But luckily, just the next year, the National Geographic Society funded SIMOC, and we start taking out from there. And nowadays, we are still funded by the National Geographic Society, which are also hosting SIMOC on their website to make it available to everyone for free. So big thanks to National Geographic Society. And the team is growing. So in 2021, so last year, we got grant on our team. We got another capstone team working with us. And we are now receiving additional funding so that we can keep growing and expanding. And it's a very exciting time. There are a lot of things going on, a lot of cool things, and I'm super excited of being part of this project. So a bit about the design of SIMOC. So SIMOC has two main parts, what we call the front end and the back end. So the front end is what you see when you go on the National Geographic website. It's a web interface. It allows you to create a mission, so set up a mission where you decide how many people are going, how long are they going to stay there, how much food do they bring, how many plants, what kind of plants. And you can set all these parameters to design a mission, and then you can run the mission and you can see what happens. So are the humans going to survive? Are the plants going to die? What is going to happen? And you can use SIMOC to do exactly this. And this is the web interface. So this is where you create a mission. So you can see you can select the number of plants, the number of solar panels, the batteries, and so on. We also have like a 3D rendering that changes in real time to show you how it might look like. It can have like, depending on how many solar panels you have different sizes of greenhouse habitats depending on the human. Like if you get like a small greenhouse, you might not have enough space for all the plants to sustain the humans. So you can change all these parameters to set up an optimal mission. And then we have the backend. So the backend is an agent-based model. I will tell you a bit more about this just in a few slides. And it's scalable, so it's hosted on the cloud so that it can support a lot of people. This is very challenging for us because we are receiving like students and people and researchers. Everyone loves it, so we get a lot of traffic, and scaling up to support everyone is quite a challenge. And also because to calculate all this simulation is very computational intensive. So it's like a big challenge, but it's like a challenge that I like to face. And we also have different type of backends. So we started with the simulation backend, which is what I was talking about. So you can specify how many humans you want, how many days, and how many solar panels, and so on, and run a simulation to see what's going to happen. But recently we added a different backend. So this is what we call the live backend. The live backend uses the same front end that we use for the simulation, but instead of showing the data that we have simulated, it shows real-time data. So I can show you how it looks like. This is the main, what we call the dashboard. So in the dashboard, you can get this, you have different panels. You can configure them however you want. You can add more panels, you can remove them, you can move them around, and you can visualize different kind of information. So we have tables, we have graphs, we have different kind of information, and this allows you to see what's going on in the mission. If you look at the bottom, you will see there's like this scrubber, that green line there, and there is like a play button, and on the bottom right, there are like the number of steps. So the steps is the unit that by default is like 1 hour. So you can see hour by hour what's going to happen in your habitat, depending on the duration of the simulation. So for example, here, if we have like a 1 month long simulation, hour by hour, for example, on the top in the middle, we have the production and consumption of energy. So you can see the solar panels produce energy during the day and they don't during the night. You can see how the atmosphere changes. You can see how the humans are doing, the levels of the oxygen, CO2, and other elements. You can see on the top right, there is like a table that shows all the storages, like how much water you have, how much oxygen you have, and how much food you have, and so on. And you can scroll back and forth and see at any point in time what's going on. And this is the simulation mode, but the live mode looks exactly the same, but the data keeps arriving and keeps updating. So I mentioned before the agent-based model. So what we did to simulate this, we use this so-called agent-based model. What does it mean? We have an agent for everything. So we have humans are agents, plants are agents, e-class modules are agents, solar panels are agents. And what do this agent do? So they have inputs, they have outputs, they have storages. So for example, a human, when it breathes in oxygen, the oxygen is temporarily stored inside the human. And then at some point, the oxygen will come out, probably as CO2. So it will bind with the carbon and come out as CO2. And we also have characteristics. So we have things like the deprivation. A human cannot go more than 21 days without eating, or like 3 days without drinking. So all this agent have these characteristics so that we know how they behave. And the agents also exchange what we call currencies. So we have oxygen, we have CO2, we have kilowatt hours, we have water, and they keep exchanging in a loop. And so this is an example. So this is a human. So you can see the human get like certain inputs. So it gets like water, it gets like oxygen, food. These are all things that are necessary for the human to survive, but it also produces a lot of output. You know, humans are pretty gross. We have like carbon dioxide, they sweat, they expel urine, feces, heat. All these things are tracked by our system. So what happens when you have, so if you have like only one agent, is kind of easy to track what's going on. But what happens when you put several humans in a closed habitat? What happens when you add plants? What happens when you add other things? You get something that looks like this. So this is a slide from the Lunar Palace system flow. So this is a closed loop, closed system. And you can see how you have like plants, you have humans, you have atmosphere, you have water storages, solid waste treatment, reclaimed water. So all these parts, so all the squares or circle that you see here, these are what we have, what we call agents. And all the arrows that move around is what we call currencies. So these currencies go from one agent to the other. They transform, like I say, for example, the oxygen become carbon dioxide and then gets broken down into something else. It goes into the plant, which becomes actual carbon that makes the plant grow. And it flows through the system in a closed loop. And this is another example. So this is from Sean Gellenbeck, is a PhD student that is working with us and using SIMOC for his studies. I will tell a bit more about that. But this is an example of another closed loop. So this is a kind of a recurring theme. Like every time you have a closed environment, you have this agent that interact with each other and exchange currency. And we want to know how this is going to work. That's why we created this software to simulate it. And to make it flexible, we designed SIMOC so that we can basically model everything. So you can also, if you wanted to, you can have every kind of agent, even, I don't know, the stock market. You could use the SIMOC, you create agents that matches something from the stock market, and you can use SIMOC to predict what's going on. So we design it in a way that is very flexible and very easy to expand. And so you might be wondering, how do we know like how much a human needs, like how much food, how much water? What about the plants? What about the E-class system? What about all these agents that we are adding to the system? So we use data from different sources. One of the major sources, it was the NASA baseline values and assumption, so the BVAD document. We also work with Ray Wheeler. I guess many of you probably know about him. His plant studies provided like a lot of data, which is very valuable for us. And not only we are using existing study, we are also producing original research. So members of our team are doing plant studies, for example, to see how the plants behave in different conditions. So Grant was working with last year on like trying to figure out what happens when there is a low CO2 amount, what happens to the plant, because the problem is most of these studies are in optimal condition, but in our simulation we want to know what happens if there is not enough CO2 or not enough oxygen or something else is missing, or like can't the plant survive 3 days without any light? What happens if we provide light after 3 days? So there are a lot of difficult questions that we are trying to answer. And in addition, we also have, for example, for the E-class data, we have, so Paragon review our data, and we constantly research and add new agents and try to make it as close to reality as possible based on the available data. And to give you an example, I'm not going to read through all this, but this is the data from Ray Wheeler. So you can see there are like a lot of plants here, and for each plant, we have a lot of values. So we have a pretty accurate model of what's going on. So we have things, for example, when you harvest the plant, what's the mass, what is the edible mass, the inedible mass. We know how much water we need, how much CO2, how much light, and different plants behave quite differently. And this is quite interesting to understand where like some plants take a long time to grow, and maybe we have just little caloric value, whereas others take much less and they have higher caloric value. But it's not as simple because some plants require a lot of light. So depending on the plant that you want to have inside your habitat, you might need a lot more solar panels. So that might not be feasible depending on like the space you have on your rocket to bring up solar panels on Mars or somewhere else. And another challenge, as I said, like you know that because of the law of conservation of mass, the mass in a closed system is constant. So nothing is destroyed, nothing is created, everything is transformed. So we want to eventually, so this is something we've been discussing for a while, we want to be able to figure out where each atom is. Of course, not at individual atom level, but let's say if I breathe in oxygen and then I breathe it out, that becomes CO2, as I mentioned. So we know that there's a certain amount of oxygen that gets inside my body as an input and gets out combined to the carbon to make CO2. And we know that this CO2 goes into the E-class module, but maybe breaks it down, or it goes into a plant. And we know that the plant grows and the mass increases. So now some of the carbon is there. And we want to be able to track all this to ensure that the system is accurate and nothing is created, nothing is destroyed. So unless someone nukes our base and we have a nuclear reaction that produces like change like mass and energy, in theory, the amount of mass should be constant, and also the amount of each element. So the amount of carbon in the system, the amount of oxygen, they all to be constant. So we're working on always striving to improve the accuracy. And so this is a good overview of what SIMOC is and how does it work, how it works. So who is using SIMOC? We have two main target audiences. So we have researchers and educators. So it's like SIMOC is both for research and for education. So for research, we have, for example, right now we have 2 PhD students using SIMOC to do studies, for example, on algae and mycelia, and also on the E-class that is going to be inside SAM. And the way it works, you can create custom agents. So SIMOC supports the creation of custom agent. For example, you can take a mushroom or an algae, and if you know the values, so the inputs and outputs, you can create a new agent, you can add it to the system, you can say this exchange oxygen, CO2, and water with these other agents. You create a connection, and then you can run the simulation and see what happens. And Sean is doing this with SIMOC first, and then in real world to see if the data matches. And for researchers, SIMOC is also available under an NDA. So I already mentioned that it's free for everyone to use on the National Geographic website, but we also make it available to run like a local installation that is like more customizable for everyone. And this is an experiment, the experiment that Sean is doing. So this is a closed container that contains algae and mushroom, and which are like exchanging currencies in a closed loop. And when we have education, so not only is useful for researchers, but the kids love it. We have several teachers from grade 5 to grade 10 for all kinds of students, and the kids really love it. So they can play around. It has like a intuitive interface. It kind of looks like a video game in a way, but unlike a video game, that usually video games are like fun to play, but maybe not very scientific. We have like hard science behind everything we do, but we present the data in such a way that the kid can understand it and can play with it and have fun and learn a lot in the process. So we have a lot of teachers using SIMOC in the classrooms. We also have a science center and museum. So we recently developed a kiosk mode so that museum and science center can put a kiosk where people can go and use SIMOC. And I want to share some of the photos that the teacher sent us. So these are some of the kids from Gretchen, and they were so excited about SIMOC that they built a small cardboard habitat, and using the live mode of SIMOC, so using the web interface, we send them some CO2 sensor, and we were using the web interface to see how the level of CO2 increases both in the classroom and inside this cardboard Mars habitat. So this is amazing. And here we have other students, and here you can see that on the left of the photos, there are like 2 students with SIMOC having like 2 different panels open. So maybe they're on the same simulation, but with a different set of panels, they can monitor 2 different parts of the system. They can make hypotheses. They say, do you think this is going to work if we increase the number of humans, or should we put less? And they compare the result and then do another simulation. We do hypotheses, they test, when we see the result, then we go back and try again. And by doing this, we learn. And here, more students, like on a tablet, playing with this. And so we got some feedback from the students. And one of the coolest things that I heard from them, many students said that it's not only about Mars. So we are not learning like how is it to live on Mars. They say that they are also learning how to live here on Earth, because by seeing these systems and thinking the relation between plants and humans, we need plants to survive because plants give us oxygen, and the humans give CO2 to the plants, and we need light, we need different things, we need water. So they realize that it's not just us human taking all the resources for us and doing what we want while we destroy the planet. We realize that we're part of a system, a closed system, because the whole Earth is like a closed system, and we need to find a balance. We need to keep the water clean. We need to avoid the greenhouse effect. We have to, like how I was saying, like don't eat too much meat. And this was very insightful. So with students learn to appreciate more what it means to live on Earth and be more careful with the environment, like the way we treat the environment around them. And I think this is like a great success story for SIMOC. And okay, so currently SIMOC has a couple of locations. So we have Mars, and we are also working right now as we speak. We are working adding the biosphere too. So we want to simulate biosphere too. So what happened before and what's happening now, and even like hypothetical scenarios. We want to model biosphere too. And we are currently working on this one. And in the future, we are planning to add more locations. So the system is designed, so even if the focus initially was on Mars, the system is flexible enough that we can add more locations. And in the future, we're planning to add the moon, the orbital reef, and we have, like with National Geographic, we are going to also add some Earth systems. So, as I said, it's like an exciting time for SIMOC and SAM, and we are expanding. We have a lot of cool plans, so keep an eye on what we are doing, because it's going to get even cooler. And so in the previous talk, Kai mentioned what we're doing with SAM. And one key thing that we are working on in the integration of SAM and SIMOC. So the first thing we are going to do is using the web interface to monitor what's going on inside SAM. So we are working with, we already tested over the past few months with sensor of arrays. So we can get several, like an array of sensors. So we have like CO2 sensor, oxygen sensor, humidity, pressure. We can get all this data from different parts inside SAM, and we can use the web interface to see what happens. So that every crew member inside SAM or outside SAM in mission control can know at any point if all the levels are okay throughout SAM. So in the greenhouse, in the crew quarters, and so on. And another extremely important thing is the data acquisition and model validation. What does it mean? So far we were just like simulating, but we had actual data. But it's difficult to know if what we are simulating is correct. By repeating the same experiment inside SAM, we can get actual real world data that we can feed back into the system, so we can get better simulation. And with the better simulation, we can plan a better mission on SAM. We can verify what happens if it matches the simulation, feed the data back in, and this is a loop that improves both systems. So this is a very, very interesting thing that I'm looking forward to do. Like I just arrived here like a few days ago, and I'm going to stay here for the next 3 months working on this project. And finally, we're also talking about using machine learning to, there are like a lot of possible applications. So we're still in the early stages and discussing, but we could use like machine learning, for example, to find optimal configuration. So for example, you could say, I want this many humans and I have this much space on my rocket. What should I bring to make them survive this amount of time? And we can also do kind of monitoring and controlling the interaction of all the agents, because, you know, for example, the E-class, we want to start scrubbing CO2, not when the humans are dying because there's too much CO2. We want to be able to predict that, for example, we are going to harvest the plant next week. And when we harvest the plant, we are not going to sequestrate enough CO2. So there will be like a spike in CO2. So we need to maybe start scrubbing CO2 a bit earlier. So there are a lot of cool things that we can do, a lot of cool things that we are already doing right now. So you get the idea. It's very extremely cool, at least for me. So I think that's it about my talk. So thanks for listening, and if you have any question, I'm here to answer. Okay.
Is it closed source or open source? And if it is closed, do you know why? And are there any good alternatives someone could look at if they wanted to do some work themselves?
So that's a great question. I was actually waiting for it. So as I mentioned, I'm a Python core developer. So I've been for over 10 years. Most of the code I wrote is open source and is out there, is in most of your computers. My code is running there. So I love open source, and I want SIMOC to be open source, but it's not yet open source. If you are a researcher, you can get the full source code. We can help you configure things. You can get access to it under an NDA, and eventually I'm pushing Kai, and Kai is on board with me, to make it open source, because I want people to use it. I mean, we did a cool thing. I want to share it with everyone. So we want to make it eventually open source. We aren't there yet, so we are discussing how this is going to affect our business model. But yeah, I certainly want to make it open source. And probably we will make some components, some part of it open source, and we'll see. But at the moment, it is not open source. But we can provide the code if you are a researcher for yourself. But yeah, great question. Thank you for asking. Yeah.
So, very interesting. Is your system, SIMOC, capable of connecting the environmental data inside SAM to the particular health outcomes or maintenance of health in the crews? Yeah.
So once we get the data, we can in the front end, for example, we have kind of some thresholds so that we can start producing warnings if, for example, the CO2 rises above a certain limit, and we can have like different levels. So this is something we can do, and certainly we can expand. I mean, we are currently developing, so every time we need like something new, we just sit there and code it. But right now, the live data is mostly visualization with some kind of threshold that you can set to show warnings. So this is what we have right now, but we are going to expand it now.
Okay, looking forward to that.
Yep.
Okay.
Hey, if you were asked by SpaceX to construct this on Mars within 4 years, how certain you are that the humans are going to survive, or is it feasible now to do it in foreseeable future for real?
So it depends a lot on the available data. So, you know, if you get like garbage in, garbage out. So the more accurate the data that we put in the system are, the more accurate the simulation is going to be. But this is like very challenging to do. And we are trying to make it as accurate as possible. But there's always the possibility that something is off, or the data were not accurate, or there is some unforeseen variable that it wasn't included in the initial studies where we get the data from. So it's a bit tricky to be. I mean, I cannot be 100% sure of the outcome, but we are trying to do our best, and we're doing pretty good, I think.